Hello and welcome to Bend the Knee, a Song of Ice and Fire podcast. I am Sir Matt.
And I'm Sir Jimmy of House Nuts. Welcome to our Song of Ice and Fire book club. Today we are into Tyrion 6 of A Storm of Swords, which is definitely a chapter I've been pretty excited to get to us after the depressing last two chapters. Amazing chapters, but very depressing. It'll be cool to kind of transition to King's Landing and start getting set up for the purple wedding out. Not the red wedding, Matt, but the purple wedding.
I know. It actually is. It's so interesting, the roller coaster that is A Storm of Swords, right? Because we've been doing all this stuff in the Red Wedding, and now we get there, and if you're reading this for the first time or you're watching this for the first time, it immediately feels like, oh my god, like it's over, like Starks are done, right? And then I actually do love how they immediately shift to, and this comes back to where I think George Martin, the decisions he made when writing this, and I think the decisions he's still struggling with, is who tells the story with these point of view chapters.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Yeah. Because he could have gone to this from Sansa's point of view, but instead we get Tyrion's, right? And you get Tyrion's point of view, and he's still trying to warm up to Sansa and figure out this whole wedding, that they've been married and how their life's going to go. And, his father's like, hey, I need you to, knock her up, essentially. And instead of getting it from Sansa's point of view, where she would have to deal with Tyrion, it's just such an interesting dynamic. It's one of those things where now we have no chance of doing this, but it would be so interesting if he had actually just sort of finished the books like most other authors to have done. He totally could have come back and written
stuff from different POVs,
stuff from different POVs, like a different point of view going through this chapter. And we get that in A Feast for Crows and A Dance of Dragons a little bit with the Sam and John chapters.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would just be so interesting to see a lot of these chapters, which is why I years ago I did that big breakdown where I wanted to go through every character, but I only ended up doing John. And to talk about, if you want to do a point of view read through, say, Sansa or whoever, you have to dive into especially Sansa and Arya, because they appear a lot in other people's chapters. Not as much with Arya when she goes off on her own, but certainly in a Game of Thrones, where you have to read other people's point of views because they're tied up. Sansa's so tied up in Ned chapters, Arya chapters, and Tyrion chapters before she goes off on her own.
Yeah, for sure. And I think probably one of the biggest pieces of the writing process for George is, I bet you he's writing these events from multiple POVs and then figuring out which one works. So he might be writing some of these chapters 2 or 3 times, depending on the POV, and then trying to piece it together. I think the reason why Tyrion is the POV, this is just my guess. I think one of the reasons why, maybe not the solo reason, is that Tyrion represents our nuance in the Lannister POV to this point. Now, Jaime is starting to come around to a redemption arc in A Storm of Swords. We're getting his POV. He's becoming a little bit more complex, not just a child pusher out the window kind of guy, but more than that. Tyrion, I think everyone is pretty enamored with through the first 3 books. So you just had this awful event that has ruined Arya's life, has ended other lives of people that we appreciate in the story, all because of the Lannisters. Jaime Lannister sends his regards. And then George puts us immediately in a Tyrion Lannister POV. So all of our nuanced 3D opinions of these houses, it's kind of the magic of the series, because you could, in theory, be rooting for the Lannisters if you love Tyrion that much, or Jaime, as many people come to do, I think, in Feast for Crows. So that would be my guess. It's oh, you hate the Lannisters right now, don't you? But here's Tyrion. And you're okay, well, I do still like Tyrion.
I know. Yeah, it just makes it so good. But hey, with that, let's dive into today's chapter, which is Tyrion 6 of A Storm of Swords. Now, normally I read the entire summary, which is always from the Song of Ice and Fire wiki, the wiki of Ice and Fire. But every once in a while, man, they put out a summary that is so long that it's 4 pages. I'm not reading all of that, right? So I'll read a little bit of some of it, and then we'll dive into it. So Tyrion and Sansa spend a joyless meal together, with both not talking much. Sansa takes a joke Tyrion makes about the quality of the food as him criticizing her, but assures her that it is not her fault and that he has more serious matters to worry about. Besides, Joffrey, Cersei, and his father are what bothers him most. There's 3 Dornishmen visiting for the king's wedding. He's settled into a comfort of the Red Keep, as far away from the Tyrells as possible. It kind of goes on a little bit. Again, I want to skip a lot of this stuff. But when he arrives at the Hand Solar, he finds Joffrey, Cersei, Kevin, and Sir Kevin, and Grandmaster Pycelle, as well as his father. And they read a message that says that Rosalind caught a fine, fat trout. Her brother gives her a pair of wolf pelts for the wedding. Checking the seal, Tyrion realizes that the message comes from the twins. He asks whether Lord Walder Frey thinks he is being poetic. He realizes that the trout refers to Edmure Tully, but before he can speculate on the meaning of the pair of wolf pelts, Joffrey announces that Robb Stark is dead.
Well, that's a trout I wish had not been caught. What's happened to old catch and release, Matt? What happened to those days?
Well, that's what Cersei did, or that's what what's her name? Catelyn did twice.
Yeah, that's very true.
She got Tyrion and she got Jaime released.
The golden rule does not apply in Westeros, however.
Yeah. So there's so much to break down from this chapter that now we're back to like really, really big chapters after we just had a really small one with Arya. That we can just take away some of the big points here. And as well, I always like to pull from the Song of Ice and Fire reread subreddit. So saying, this is the first chapter after the Red Wedding events occur. This chapter makes me really wish Sansa would open up to Tyrion just a little bit. She has such a guard up around her, and rightfully so. She doesn't realize Tyrion is trying to be genuine and actually does want to be there for her. Of course, any chance of that happening goes out the window when Tyrion has this realization at the end of the chapter. And when do you imagine Sansa will be at her most fertile? Before or after I tell, her how we murdered her mother and her brother. This chapter is such a downer when it seems like the bad guys are winning and there's no hope left. With all that said, I do really enjoy the chapter, as I do most Tyrion chapters, and the ball is now rolling and the pace doesn't slow down for the rest of the book. And it's almost like, right, it's almost like you're pushing a stone up a hill, right? Or like up a mountain, and now you've passed that first peak, and now we're speeding along down the hill until we ramp all the way back up again.
Very much 2 climaxes in this book, which ironically a lot of my favorite fantasy books have 2 climaxes. Bone Hunters and Malazan is a great example. This was like a big siege, and then there's a plague at the end of the book, and they're both pretty horrifying. Very similar to Storm of Swords in the formatting of it. But for me, Sansa's so tragic, and yes, she should maybe open up to Tyrion a little bit. Like, we would love for her to do that, but is it not completely justifiable that she would not at this point? I mean, we're talking about a character in book 1 who was so trusting of ideals and of fairy tales and statuses and titles, only to have all of that come crashing down on her head when her father is decapitated and she is to be wed to a monster named Joffrey Baratheon. So it's one of these things where we're begging her, just listen to Tyrion a little bit, but also completely reasonable that she would not trust anyone. And I think that is a pretty sad thing for the character arc of Sansa, right? Is the fact that she loses trust in people and that she has no one around her, and where she's at right now in the story. Clearly, Peter Baelish is not looking out for her best interest. But I do believe in the last 2 books, if we were ever to get them, that I think one of the big pieces of Sansa's character arc is beginning to trust again, but it will be the right people this time, which would make for a very beautiful reunion between her and Arya, right? Someone she did not like, treated very poorly, I would say, though Arya wasn't innocent in the first book, to have her come back around and being like, you know what, actually, I can trust you. I think would be a pretty beautiful moment for Sansa's character arc. But at this point in the story, she's down bad. She seems to have no allies other than a drunken, disgraced knight. But yeah, it's sad. Definitely would love for her to trust Tyrion and open up. But also the whole fertile thing's really disturbing, right? Like I hate that. I hate that so much.
Yeah, it's bad. Yeah, this chapter really is, and that's one of the things that this actually I think is probably one of the most important, if not underrated, chapters in the series, because there is so much happening here from really two characters' perspectives, both Tyrion and Sansa's, and this is one of those things where, we talked a little bit about earlier the point of view. This would be such a different read from Sansa's perspective, and I almost, it's like obviously we have this version, but she doesn't know yet that her brother's dead,
right?
And
she doesn't know the full scale of what's happened.
Yeah, she has no idea about the full scale. So it would almost be more, I don't want to say it's more interesting. George wrote it this way, and we're just looking at it in hindsight. But that would be such an interesting way to read it, as you get like even a small Sansa chapter where she's with Tyrion and she doesn't know, the details of it. But I think also the weight of it is now on Tyrion and the Lannister side. And I think that that's just such a more powerful way to do this, because now you're like even more worried about Sansa. So the weight of the worry and the weight of the fear of like, oh no, what's going to happen to Sansa now, right? And because now it's well, now the imp. Remember, book Tyrion is not as good looking as Peter Dinklage. Okay,
right?
You know what I mean? He is like nose is chopped off, and he's very ugly little imp. Is really much so. And now you're hearing, now he's gonna have to impregnate her, and all this stuff. Jeez. The weight of that is pushing on him. I know it's bad. It's so bad. It's so bad. This medieval world that you're living in here. But I think doing it from Tyrion's point of view was ultimately the right call. But I mean, that just would have been such an interesting. That would be something we talked about last week or the week before. If we could ask George, like we could ever interview him and ask him some questions, like what does non wins a winner, like what decides, like what was the decision behind like a chapter like that's being like, no, this should come from Tyrion's point of view. I mean, here he gets to move the story forward by having it be from Tyrion's instead of Sansa's point of view, by getting the information from Joffrey. And also like that's a big thing too. But I mean, you still could have done it. Like imagine if it's not in the hand of the king and Joffrey walks in and like Tyrion and Sansa are having breakfast or something, and then he tells it to her, because then he gets to like look in her eyes. There's just so many.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest parts about storytelling is once you pen it down, go through the edits and send it in, it's over. Like it is sealed. Now, like you said, some authors do go back and write things from the POV. That's cool. But for the most part, the majority of writers, once it's done, it's done. You can only do it one way, and then you put it forward. I think another reason probably to give this chapter to Tyrion is that the end of this book is very much a Tyrion ending. We get the moment with Jaime, which really catapults Tyrion to a different character arc. Yeah, I mean, we've already talked about the intersection of Jaime and Tyrion as one starts to degrade and one is now looking for redemption, and who's the hero and who's the villain of them. I don't think our terms hero and villain really apply too much to A Song of Ice and Fire. It's more about the perspective of who's looking at that character, whether or not they're good or evil. But this chapter also really gets to flex the way George is able to use information as tension. So with us in the head of Tyrion, who now does know about what happened, at least knowing something terrible happened, that information that's being withheld, and we're not saying from Sansa's POV, we are therefore secondarily worried about Sansa during a Tyrion chapter, which makes the investment so much more because you're flipping the pages hoping to get a Sansa chapter next. At least I was. So George has always been someone who manipulates information really, really well. And I think it's a little less annoying to read it from a POV who is aware of what's happened. Like if we got into a Sansa chapter and it was 20 pages and 18 pages is of her not knowing and then finding out at the very end, it would be effective. But I feel like those 18 pages would be laborious because we'd be like, I just want to find out what she thinks, like once she finds it out, right? Also, information travels very slowly in Westeros. We've talked about this so many times with like Arya hearing little things about the Red Wedding, but not quite the whole story with the phrase. And it's telling, it's obvious, it's clear as day that this was a pre-orchestrated event. There was deals made behind closed doors. It was going to happen one way or another. But the final like nail in that coffin to say, okay, this has absolutely been planned meticulously, is the fact that King's Landing finds out about the results so fast. Information does not travel this fast usually, right? Immediately they know. Now it could have been a few days, like we don't know how much time passes between, but there's always been a delay in information in this world, especially if we cross the narrow sea to Essos, where Danny finds out about Robert's death, far into book two.
Right. Yeah. It's like the book two.
Yeah. It's so long. I think that's just just a little consistency thing where it's like, oh, that information traveled pretty quick for it to be, a surprise. Clearly it was not. And I know that's obvious looking back, but it's just a little thing that George does to kind of keep the world consistent, I think.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. And it's one of those things too, where with like the information and like you said, how it's traveling, like it's almost shocking that Tyrion doesn't know about this first.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But he's also kind of been out of the loop since Blackwater.
Well, I think that's another thing that's pretty good about this is like he's been kicked out of, now he's no longer the hand, right? He's been kicked out of some things, and they actually talked a little bit about it with like the cook, right? Like and he's the food, and he's thinking about like he's been knocked down a few pegs, and I think you see that here, and especially a lot of it with like the conversation he has with his father. And he's like sort of resulted to like, he tries to make these jokes, and his dad, quips him about making jokes, and he proceeds to just make a bunch of jokes because that's like a coping mechanism for Tyrion. And I think that's part of this is that before, very much in A Clash of Kings, when Tyrion is the hand of the king, he feels like he's on top running the show, and now he's been knocked back to peg, and I think you see it a lot in this chapter.
So let me ask you this. We know that Tyrion has been degraded in court a large amount due to Cersei. Cersei has schemed behind his back, tried to have him killed, whatever it might be. But we also have Tywin saying, you brought your whore to court. That's unacceptable. Also, Tyrion is the outcast of the family, doesn't really love the fact that Tyrion has a last name Lannister. But is there any consideration for the fact that Tywin knew what was coming with the Red Wedding and knew Tyrion could not be involved in it, so kept him in a position where he would be away from these secrets because he knew Tyrion would have something to say about it?
That's a good point. Yeah, probably. It's Tyrion and Tywin's relationship is one of the most, if not the most interesting, because I think Tywin on some hands he seems to underestimate Tyrion, but on others he seems to know exactly like how good and how useful Tyrion is. I think the person he underestimates all of us. He
underestimates.
Does he? I don't know that he underestimates Jaime. I think he overestimates Jaime.
I think he's just severely disappointed in Jaime's apathy towards all of his like motivations. Like, he's like, you gotta do this, gotta do. Jaime's like,
he definitely underestimates Sansa or
Cersei and Tyrion. I think he does know Tyrion's smart though. I mean, anyone could tell that he has pretty good wit, but maybe he begrudges him just for the fact that he is smart. Like you'd be such a useful tool if you hadn't killed my wife and had not been born an imp.
Yeah, I think if Tyrion didn't do as much, whoring and drinking and stuff like that, I think Tywin would be a little more receptive to him. He would always view him as the, like, you're the reason my wife's dead and that. So he would, but some of it is Tyrion's to blame. And that's actually a big part of this chapter too, by the way. This is also setting up, like you said, now that the Red Wedding is over, and we're into the final stretch. We have really two more mega moments in this, which is, the end of this, right? With Tyrion's huge moment, and then also the Purple Wedding, which is coming. But a lot of the seeds towards that are like planted here. With like, you need to get Sansa pregnant, and you need to do, this and that. And Tyrion deciding, I'm going to go in a different route, and I'm going to go on my own, and so much of that. So I there's actually some other cool stuff, and I'm going to read. This is again from the Song of Ice and Fire reread, diving into quite a bit of the good details of this. So there's a line, and what were you telling him? A lot happens here, which is in their conversation, which stands out to me, though. It is in this exchange, which seems to hint at the baby switch that produces young Griff of A Dance with Dragons. It occurs when Tywin and Tyrion are discussing justice for Dorne, because that's also another big thing. This is a lot happens in this chapter. Dorne is really kind of being brought into the fold much more. We'd seen them coming in, in the Tyrion chapter before, but now we're getting some of that backstory. We had come late to Robert's cause. It was necessary to demonstrate our loyalty. When I laid those bodies beside the throne, no man could doubt they had forsaken House Targaryen forever. And Robert's relief was palpable. As stupid as he was, even he knew that Rhaegar's children had to die if his throne was ever to be secure. Yet he saw himself as a hero, and heroes do not kill children. His father shrugged. I grant you. It was done too brutally. Elia need not to have been harmed at all. That was sheer folly, but herself, she was nothing. Then why did the mountain kill her? Because I did not tell him to spare her. I doubt I mentioned her at all. I had more pressing concerns. Ned Stark was rushing south from the Trident, and I feared I might come to swords between us. And it was an Ares to murder Jaime with no more cause than spite. That was the thing I feared most. That and what Jaime himself might do. He closed a fist. Nor did I yet grasp what I had in Gregor Clegane, only that he was huge and terrible in battle. The rape. Even you will not accuse me of giving that command, I would hope. Sir Armory, which is Armory Lork, was almost as bestial with Rhaenys. I asked him afterwards why it required 100 thrusts to kill a girl of 2, 3. He said she'd kicked him and would not stop screaming. If Lork had half the wits as gods gave a turnip, he would have calmed her with a few sweet words and used a soft silk pillow. His mouth twisted in distaste. The blood was in him. Prince Aegon's horrific death, however, isn't mentioned in this. This passage takes place after Tywin is obliged to send Joffrey to bed with a dose of dream wine and lets us know what he thinks about Joffrey's upbringing. It looks very contrast to young Griff's upbringing, which we learn about in A Dance with Dragons. It could be only a red herring or a stretch too far, yet combined with the other little hints that we see in A Dance with Dragons, it wouldn't be entirely surprising if young Griff were actually Rhaegar's son. And then on a side note, they talk about the cook. There's a line: "Should some cook should be sorry, not you." Poor Tyrion, to go from having the best cook in King's Landing to suffer over overcooked peas. Is a come down, like I said earlier, where it's like he's getting knocked down. It's a kind of a theme of this. The first thing he'd have done after taking up residence in the Tower Hand was inquire after the finest cook in the city after taking her into his service. So a lot to break down, like we talked about the Tywin Tyrion dynamic, but also this. Right. And I think this is actually kind of a good look into Tywin, because there's no reason for Tywin to be playing the Game of Thrones with Tyrion in this conversation. Right. I don't think Tywin is one of the people we consider to be one of the smartest people in the series. Yeah. He definitely doesn't need the kids brutally murdered. Right. As long as they're dead, to him, he's done his job. The claim is over. But actually, if anything, it makes him look worse, which is the problem he's about to be dealing with Oberyn Martell and Dorne. And so
it also shows that what goes around comes around, right? Like, you're not going to get away with that type of thing. And it is ironic that Tywin's saying, "Oh, I would never want them brutally murdered," while he just orchestrated the Red Wedding that we just read, right? Like, he just did not just a terrible thing, but something that's considered almost like sacrilege. Like, it's completely taboo for what he did. And yet he is saying, like, "Well, I'm not a monster. I wouldn't have brutally murdered anyone. We could have spared this person." Well, they didn't spare a damn person from the Red Wedding. So I actually think, I don't know if he's necessarily playing the Game of Thrones with Tyrion, but he's absolutely lying. Like, he's coping, I think. Trying to maybe play with that. Maybe he wasn't sure how Tyrion would feel about the Red Wedding, so he's trying to like soften his image to his son. Like, that's really the question, though, is like, if Tyrion had known about the Red Wedding, would he have tried to change it or stop it possibly? I don't know. Maybe Tywin thinks so.
Yeah, he probably would have said they're more used to us as captives. He probably would have stood up a little bit for Catelyn Stark, because she spared him and did spare Jamie,
That is
and
true.
they have her mother, and you could actually marry her off, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she's old, but you still could marry her off. I mean, it comes down to how you value these, these individuals, and where you think the value lies. I mean, Catelyn, yeah, you could marry her off. I don't know. You could hand her. I would give her to, if you were going to do that, I'd give her to some. I don't know. Give her to Baelish. Really. I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
Oh,
I
I was about to say
mean.
Walter Frey. That'd be
Well, I
horrible.
mean, you'd because Edmure is more important because he is the actual heir to River Run.
Right.
Right.
Hmm.
Which seems so weird that they don't just kill Edmure. What's the? I mean,
I think they just think he's an idiot, like he's of no threat. I think that's
right, but I
kind of what
mean,
they're.
why not kill Edmure and then just say we're in charge of the twins now, or we're in charge of River Run now?
Well, if you keep Edmure alive and you marry him off, you get the Riverlands in a way that is considered like, kosher, I guess, in some
But
ways.
you
But
brutally murder people and like disobeying King's Right, which they're going to think is all the gods, or not King's
but
Right, but
Edmure
house.
kept his word. Edmure did marry one of Frey's daughters. So
Yeah,
in some respects, you could actually hide behind that and say, well, hey, we only took care of the people who were breaking oaths, right? Edmure kept his oath, so we kept him alive. We are fair here, eye for
yeah,
an eye. And it does probably, I think this is a little loose, probably keeps the chance of rebellion down in the Riverlands.
yeah.
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah. What do you think about because this, okay, look, what about some of the young Griff stuff that could potentially this, because remember George is writing
Yeah.
this at this moment in time, he's still probably thinking 5-year jump is happening.
Yeah. I mean, I'm under the assumption that young Griff is Blackfire. I think that's
Right.
definitely
But maybe
the
at one point
case.
he
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. George definitely writes things with the idea of being able to go either way later down the road. I think that's one of the reasons why Tyrion has some really interesting early chapters about dragon dreams and riding a dragon. And it's like, well, maybe,
tumbling and
yeah, hey, who knows? Like maybe he was going to go somewhere with that. So he does keep things a little bit ambiguous. I would imagine to have something in his back pocket if he were want to change the story. So at this point, I mean, we can't really say whether young Griff was imagined or if, maybe I should say young Griff would be imagined as a Blackfire. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting thought about it. Just because he's writing it here, you would have to imagine it's still with that time jump in mind.
Definitely, yeah.
And
He's definitely thinking time jump here.
Yeah, and to tell that, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, even without that, it's it does give you kind of an insight to, like I said, with Tywin and maybe. But I read it and I think, well, maybe Tywin's not as bad as we think. But yeah, good point. Last chapter he did orchestrate this like brutal murder. But
Yeah,
again,
he's saying one thing and has done
did
another.
he right? Did he say, oh, this is exactly how it should be done, or is he just giving the order like kill this person? And he's
Well, then we
assuming
come
that
to
these people won't
he knew
murder.
they were going to be under protection of the house from breaking bread, right? Like he knew
Right.
that for sure. But also, I'll just ask you, does it matter?
Yeah.
Like, does it matter? Like, they're dead. I've always thought that was an interesting, like, at least he went peacefully. And I'm like, yeah, well, he's still dead. So I don't know. To me, it's still a tragedy, one way or another. Like, is there a more ethical way of murdering someone? Maybe, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Especially under the guise of protection, which is pretty terrible in this world.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? Anything else in this chapter? I know this chapter's pretty large, so
I'm just excited about Oberyn Martell.
Small detail.
I'm just excited about Oberyn Martell, dude. He's one of the most compelling characters in this series, and it's ironic because he's not around very long, and he gives us one of the coolest fights in fantasy with him in the mountain and how epic this is. Also, we've heard mentions of why the Martells do not like the Lannisters. We know the sack of King's Land. We knew all this stuff, right? But I was so invested the first time I read whenever Oberyn is, speaking to the mountain, right? And he's just repeating those phrases over and over and over. It's so impressive how much I care about this history between these two families for how little page time it actually gets to this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll read the last little paragraph here, or last few paragraphs, just so. I'll kind of start here. So they talk a little bit about like they're talking about what's the payoff for all this stuff. Like what was the price for doing all this?
Yeah.
So the price was cheap by any measure. The crown shall grant River Run to Sir Emmon Frey once the Blackfish yields. Lancel and Davin must marry Frey girls. Joy is to wed one of Lord Walder's natural sons when she is old enough, and Roose Bolton becomes Warden of the North and takes home Arya Stark. Arya Stark, Tyrion cocked his head, and Bolton, I might have known Frey would not have the stomach to act alone, but Arya, Varys and Sir Jocelyn searched for her for more than half a year. Arya Stark is surely dead. So was Renly until the Blackwater. What does that mean? Perhaps Littlefinger succeeded where you and Varys failed. Lord Bolton will wed the girl to his bastard son. We shall allow the Dreadfort to fight the Ironborn for a few years and see if he can bring Stark's other bannermen to heel. Come spring, all of them should be at the end of their strength and ready to bend the knee. The North will go to your son by Sansa Stark if you ever find enough manhood in you to breed one. You forget it is not only Joffrey who must need to take a maidenhead. So then he just talks about, the part we already mentioned. So this is also where the like Arya Stark business, the false Arya kind of business starts. Remember, we just read an Arya chapter. So it's weird coming back and looking at this because, we're so far ahead now. We're like, it's not, we don't even worry about it. But if you're reading this for the first time, remember, Arya gets knocked out. That's the end of the last chapter. And now you're thinking, oh my God, they have Arya too.
Yeah, it's true, right? Like,
yeah.
He's kind of playing with us a little bit here. That's a really good point.
Yeah, because then you don't hear about Arya until, then it's like a Davos chapter, a Jon chapter, Bran, Daenerys. So then you go back to Tyrion. Sansa. You don't even see Arya again for. Let me see here. I don't know, 8-9 more chapters. Davos, Jon. Is that actually the last
sitting waiting?
Yeah, Arya. So it's about like 10 or 12 more chapters. I'm not looking at the list, so I was just kind of scrolling through. But yeah, so it's like it's a good while before you, and even in that Arya chapter, she's talking about like the first few paragraphs is almost like she was hungry, she's tired, and it's like, is she a prisoner? And then you get to her where she's with the Clegane. So you'd have to like go back to that. But yeah, kind of a very interesting way to end the chapter.
It is. You know what's funny about this is like, I think Tywin thinks he's doing Tyrion a favor here, being like, all you have to do is get Sansa pregnant, and he has for so long harped on Tyrion for being someone who's going and whoring around. So it's like, well, if you want to contribute to the family, you're going to do your favorite thing in the world. Like that's kind of Tywin's like stand. It's almost Tywin like mocking him in some ways. If you're enough of a man. Right. Like it's just so dirty. And I do think Tyrion does crave to be useful. And I think that's what frustrates him is like, I'm so smart. Like if you could see past what I am and you could see past, what happened with my mother, you have the most useful of your children sitting right here. And to be reduced down to just basically being told to go and, knock somebody up. Tyrion is just sit like, you just don't get it, Dad. You just certainly don't get it. And then I think he also resents a lot about Jaime and Cersei, maybe at least subconsciously with Jaime, definitely consciously with Cersei, that they're used to a greater degree than he is.
Yeah. Even though he got to be hand of the king.
And did honestly a decent job.
And saved the city.
Saved Blackwater, right? He did a pretty knock-up job. If all things even, I think that he was great. And he stood and fought. He showed bravery. He showed wit. He showed courage. He showed loyalty. He hates Joffrey, but he still backed Joffrey that whole time. Like he was loyal and has been rewarded with it absolutely pretty much not at all. And is now being told to do something that's pretty heinous, I would say. Like, and Tyrion goes in and out kind of like, well, I wouldn't mind, but like, I know it's, I know she doesn't want it. And like, this is cruel. And he can identify that it's cruel. So that little bit of empathy with Tyrion, I think, is kind of what makes him redeemable at this moment.
Do
Later
you
down
think?
the road, he
Yeah.
kind of gets rid of that, which is
And do
sad.
you like the show kind of teased a little bit of it? Like we see Tyrion and Sansa have a kind of a conversation in like season 8, and like they're sitting by each
Mhm.
other when the crypts are, in that whole big Battle of Winterfell episode, Long Night. Um, do you think at all that they will have conversations or something like that in Winds of Winter that can come back? And they
Yeah,
seemed a little more favorable to each other because even Sansa's
yeah.
like, well, Tyrion actually never like did anything with me. He never, so she does kind of like at least find that somewhat redeemable.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of the things we were talking about earlier about how Sansa's been pretty much stripped of all of her trust, and she's going to have to find her trust later in the series to be part of her character arc, I believe.
Yeah.
I think that Tyrion is one of them.
That could actually be something like it's kind of weird because Sansa in the books is so different. Is and we still have no idea really where she's going to go, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
Sansa Tyrion, we have no
Huge
idea. We
question
have we
mark.
have no idea because it's so different with her not being with Bolton and everything that
Mhm.
maybe she, and if she doesn't end up like young Griff doesn't end up like kind of going there because the Vale is such a mystery. Like that army is just
Yeah.
waiting to go pounce, and we don't know how the Battle of the Bastards and all that stuff's going to go because again, it is so different, right? Where I mean, man, Daenerys and Tyrion could go over there, and like maybe that they meet up with them first or something, or they ally with them because so it's just so
The
yeah.
Vale's a huge chess piece that we're not sure where he's going to land.
No, to me, I mean, it's like the biggest mystery.
Mhm. Yeah, and it all ties into Stannis and the
Everything,
Pink
yeah,
Letter and all of that. Yeah,
everything,
like how does that unfold? Especially with the timelines are different, right?
yeah,
Like it's wild.
yeah,
Hard Home is in a completely different space
yeah.
in the plot. Like, yeah, it's pretty major. And John's dead right now, by the way.
John's dead. Yeah,
John is
so
dead.
yeah, so different.